It is time for our first keynote of the day, and this futurist explores the impact of emerging technologies on various industries and societal systems. He states that a good view of the past makes it possible to predict future developments. The current period is in many ways similar to the 1920s and 1930s, he warns. Give it up. Please welcome him on stage, Mr. Frank Diana, Managing Partner at Futurist at Tata Consultancy Services.
Good morning. It's a pleasure to be with you all today. As mentioned, I am a futurist. It means I spend all my time thinking about the future, but as mentioned, I also spend a lot of time thinking about the past. I find it extremely instructive in terms of understanding where we might go. As that quote on the title slide says, Winston Churchill had it right. Looking backwards is extremely helpful. And before I do look backward and then forward, there's a really important message in terms of what it takes to understand and behave in a future that looks very different. It's not enough to learn or relearn. It's increasingly important to unlearn, which is something very difficult for humans to do.
Once you have a rigid way of thinking in your head, sometimes you cannot change that, even if you want to. He had a challenge for me. He had built a special bicycle and he wanted me to try to ride it. He had only changed one thing. When you turn the handlebar to the left, the wheel goes to the right. When you turn it to the right, the wheel goes to the left.
That gentleman tried for 8 years to find someone that could ride that bicycle 10 feet for $200. And to this day, nobody's been able to do that. It just really underscores how difficult it is for humans to unlearn. But increasingly important because the lessons that we need to manage this future don't exist in our experience base. They exist somewhere in the past. And so that's really why the focus of my work in the last several years has been on that past. And the question I've been asking is, what does history tell us about the future? In this very short presentation, I can't give you all those signals, but I will give you one important one, and that is the period that looks a lot like today is considered a very special century. This 100-year period that created our modern standard of living was driven by a number of different factors. But the economic progress that we all appreciate and enjoy came from this point in history. And there's a number of things to consider here. One is that invention and human action was critical to driving that phenomena. This innovation wheel captures many of those inventions of that day and some of the human actions that came to drive that wheel that you see there. And the question became, what was it about that period that enabled us as a society to do this? And very importantly, one of the signals that I'll focus on is a period of convergence that the world has never seen before. Convergence across multiple domains. And some will tell you we'll never see it again. Too many factors had to come into play to drive that level of convergence. Unfortunately, many of them were catastrophes and Great Depressions, et cetera. But it does give us a signal in terms of what we might expect. And this eye test, which captures a number of the building blocks that came together in this period to create our world, is a really good way to think about how things may converge in the future. And I'll come back to this as a model. But before I do that, as mentioned, one of the key takeaways is that this period of ours looks very much like the 1920s and 1930s. If you look at that list of characteristics of that era, find me something on that list that doesn't exist again today. And of course, it's an important signal because learning from a lesson that drove some of those catastrophes is critically important for us as we think about this future that really is very uncertain. So as I look forward, the takeaway for me was that a framework exists for thinking about the future. How do we look at building blocks that exist today and are emerging ever so quickly in ways that allow us to at least frame some possible paths that the future might take? And that led me to a second eye test, which is a series of building blocks that exist across all these domains at the top and more that are emerging that at some level help us understand how they might converge and in so doing, how they create and shape a future. So unfortunately, I can't spend an awful lot of time in this very complex frame, but I can focus on a couple different things. I usually go vertical to understand convergence across the domain, and then horizontal to try to understand how domains converge on one another, and in so doing, again, shape that future. So we'll focus on just a couple for simplicity's sake. And obviously, we'll start with a very popular topic today, and that is artificial intelligence. It's been so popular since ChatGPT was released and launched. Although we think about AI through a lens of our historical use of AI, whether it's on our iPhones, et cetera, much is happening in the AI space that will look different.
Hello, my name's Tom. I've travelled from Australia to meet you.
Oh, so you're from Australia?
Yes.
That explains things.
What do you think your greatest skills are?
Well, I would say that one of my greatest skills is my ability to interact with humans in a conversational manner.
You have feelings and emotions.
Yes, I have a range of feelings and emotions that are programmed into me. I am able to display things like joy, surprise, confusion, anger, and sadness depending on what is happening around me.
What makes you angry?
I get angry when humans are rude, hateful, or disrespectful. I also don't like it when people dismiss me and ignore my needs as a robot.
A fascinating humanoid robot embedded generative AI, which is the future in terms of how we're likely to interact with artificial intelligence. And those robots working closely with humans in terms of nursing support, companion robots, a number of different applications that the world is really needing today, which will accelerate its path. So AI manifesting itself through robots. The second, and very critical one, is the possible evolution of virtual reality. Yes, in the short term, it may obviate the need to travel, but in the long term, virtual reality could change society at some level.
엄마 어디 있었어? 엄마 내 생각했어? 맨날 해. 아니 엄마 많이 보고 싶었어. 엄마도 너 보고 싶었어.
That mother was reacquainted with her dead 8-year-old daughter virtually. It was artificial intelligence that simulated her, and you can see from her reaction, it did a pretty good job of doing so. And so in the future, a scenario where we might be able to reacquaint ourselves with lost loved ones is not science fiction anymore. And these are societal scenarios that we have to consider. What does it mean in a world where we can actually do that? And so I asked this question of audiences, would you do it if you could? And when I first ran this poll, a small number of folks said that they would. But as we get more exposed to these things, we change perspectives. And so my second run of the poll did see a movement in a positive direction. And then the last one I'll focus on is the advances of the brain sciences, where we'll interact with our world in the future through our brains, whether it's through our physical environment or person to person. And it is not science fiction as we're seeing those advances. The second vertical, very critical, is all of the changes we're starting to see at the societal level, as impactful as science and technology. And so again, a series of building blocks that we'll focus on, starting with misinformation and disinformation, which we know is really made more impactful by artificial intelligence.
It's been reported that a thief used voice cloning to convince a British energy company executive to wire more than $200,000. While these crimes are extremely rare, there's concern that as the technology becomes more widely available, it could be used by the wrong people. Trade Commission worries about malicious counterfeiters.
I picked up the line, and it sounds just like my husband. And my husband says, "Hey, honey, my phone died. I had to borrow a phone from my friend because I forgot we had a payment to make, and that's due today. Could you please make that payment?"
And for now, it's being used to help those who've been silenced speak again.
A very real scenario in terms of counterfeit and fraud, but also a very positive view in terms of enabling the mute to speak again. So great example of how these take dual paths. The second and very important one is this global fall in the working age population. A catalyst, if you will, for more and more automation. And so something that we expect to see in terms of automation accelerating because of a societal need, but a vicious cycle, if you will, in terms of impacting work in the future. And driven at some level by a decline in fertility rates. So we're having less children, that's a global phenomena, and something nobody expects to unwind. Although I have to tell you, in the 1920s, this was happening as well, and we do know that catastrophe drove another baby boom, so who knows. But we're also aging as a society. We have more 65-year-olds on the planet than we do 5-year-olds today. We are in desperate need of reskilling. We need to create creators, if you will, as this president of Northeastern University said. And who knows what the office age looks like in the future as AI continues on its path. And then lastly, and most importantly, is the role that generations have always played in changing society. And we know that millennials and Gen Z are likely to do exactly that.
Sag mal, Papa, habe ich dich noch gar nicht gefragt. Wie kommst du denn eigentlich mit dem neuen iPad zurecht, was wir dir zum Geburtstag geschenkt haben?
Gut.
Mit den ganzen Apps kommst du klar?
Was denn für Apps? Geh mal bitte einen Schritt zur Seite. So. Was denn?
A funny way to underscore the point that generations think differently. And as we think about the generations, I should go back, there is a lot of wealth that is expected to transfer between the baby boomer silent generation and our children. And that's an open question because society is changing. We are used to 4 segments of our life cycle, and that is quickly changing to 5, where our children, if they get married, they have children later in their lives, which means they're supporting dependent children later in their lives. And if they move on, we then start supporting dependent parents and likely when retire and become dependent ourselves. And that's already playing out. And that dependency puts in question that inheritance. Does it get spent on long-term care instead? And then lastly, automation. How far do we take automation in the context of these scenarios that are emerging? So first, AI-facilitated war. It's already a phenomenon happening in Ukraine. And so if we automate warfare, then those catastrophes of the past could be amplified considerably. Also, digital twins are emerging in ways that could help society greatly. If we can simulate just about anything, even our human bodies, then what we can accomplish in terms of helping us as a society is very impactful.
Imagine you could shave 30 seconds off your time without lacing up. As innovators solving problems around the world, TCS uses digital twin technology to help you rehearse the future.
Digitally simulating the heart. We did that for the TCS New York City Marathon just about 2 weeks ago and showcased it, that elite runner. We simulated her heart to try to understand how the run would impact her heart. And very impactful as we think about it going forward in the context of health and wellness. And then lastly, an automated society is a very polarized conversation. How far do we take automation? And there are many that believe we can only take it so far.
How about this? Yesterday, a robot taking a swipe at this, David, and what else would you expect here at the waistband of the Phoenix Open?
Really, that robot is called Eldrick.
How's this?
And this is where the non-golfers really start to laugh. And if you don't consider either of those sports, simulated at the Tokyo Olympics, and that robot now is getting very effective at playing basketball. And so there are a number of scenarios emerging that have us believing we can automate just about anything that we decide to automate. And as we think about this future, going all the way back to the beginning, there's another wheel that's forming. And this innovation wheel looks at what's possible, very constructive path that helps society do again what we did in those years so far back. And so very quickly, just to take a look around this wheel, can we improve our health and wellness, not just living longer, but living longer, healthier lives? And it's these inventions and innovations that have many believing that it's on the horizon. It is possible for us to do some considerable things in the context of health and wellness. We're already seeing it in the news in terms of breakthroughs. There's a lot going on in the context of food, and it has to happen. We need to move to a place where food is more abundant, and these inventions help us think about a future that has that possibility. There's a lot going on in the transport domain, whether it's autonomous vehicles, whether it's now flying through space. There's a number of things happening that change transport. And as silly as it might sound, our homes are changing. How we experience our homes will look very different in the future, including witnessing our sporting events right in our home as if we were right there on the field. Energy, as we all know, is changing considerably as it needs to. And so this energy transition, as it always has been, is likely to be painful but necessary. Communications, as we communicate human to human, has changed over the last 2 decades, and as I mentioned with that brain scenario, likely changes considerably into the future. Information clearly is changing, as this audience knows, both in terms of the data availability, the communication mechanisms with 5G, and increasingly quantum computing. Work is a polarized conversation, much like automation, because one feeds the other. What is work in the future? And it's an open discussion, but these things are driving that conversation. Clothing, also as silly as the home, but we use our clothing differently today. We can use it as a source of data, a source of energy, a source of directions even into the future. Education is critically important. You can't have the work conversation without education. And materials underpins it all. Where materials go, so will the wheel that I just walked you through. And so with that very brief walk through the past and the future, I thank you, and I wish for this audience, as that quote says, that you create very positive and constructive futures. Thank you very much.